Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. As we get further into Psalm 89, we see the psalmist looking around him and looking at the circumstances that he found himself in and feeling as though what he was experiencing didn't line up with God's covenant that he had made with David. And he laments this very fact, and he says in verse 38, you have cast off and rejected. You have been full of wrath against your anointed. You have spurned the covenant of your servants. You have profaned his crown in the dust. And he goes on. And he basically feels as though there's an inconsistency. That God had made this wonderful covenant with David, with all of these wonderful promises that, his seed would never be cut off, and that he would always have someone on the throne and that sort of thing. However, when he looks around, he sees that his circumstances doesn't align with that. And sometimes we might feel that way as well. We might look into God's word and see precious promises there, or we might see statements of truth in the scriptures, and yet we look in our lives and we say, my life doesn't look like that at all, or that's not consistent with what I'm experiencing. And we might feel as though our circumstances are going in the opposite direction of God's promises. And that can happen whether we're talking about our personal experiences, or we could think about the world globally, and we see things going on in the world and we wonder, are we moving closer to God's in promises, or are we moving further away from them? And we might become discouraged, we might become confused and perplexed. But as we think about the psalmist's experience here in Psalm 89, we can see that the problem didn't lie with God's covenant or God's word. The problem lied with the psalmist not being able to really wrap his head around what was going on. That is, God's promises were deeper than his ability to comprehend and to accurately assess his situation. We have the advantage of looking back in hindsight, and we see that God was faithful to his covenant, and actually the things that happened to Israel and to Judah and to Jerusalem was all a part of God moving his plan forward to ultimately fulfilling them through the Messiah, through Jesus Christ. And it might very well be the case that when we look at our circumstances and we see, and we, scratch our heads and wonder, does this really align with God's word? We could say, well, is the fault with God's word, or is the fault with me and my inability to really comprehend the depths of God's word, and also to reach to the heights of God's thoughts? And if that's the case, we have to say, you know what? God has the upper hand. God has wisdom beyond my wisdom. He has a plan that goes beyond my comprehension, and that I have to just rely on his word, trust in his word, even when my circumstances confuse me and when I don't quite understand. And so hopefully, as we think about the psalmist's situation here in Psalm 89, and we find ourselves in similar situations, that we will just remember that in the end, it will all make sense. When we look back on our lives and we look back on human history in general, we'll see God's ultimate plan being woven through the confusion, the chaos, the difficulties, the challenges that we had faced and many other people had faced as well. And we'll see that God's perfect plan did work through it all. God was faithful to his promises, and he did bring things to a fulfillment just as he had said. So these are some things we can reflect on and think about as we do our reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.